Welcome to the Vertical Sky Journal, the podcast that brings you everything you could ever want to know about Kilimanjaro. The climbing and the fitness, altitude and nutrition, the environment, the wildlife, and the people at the heart of the mountain. Today, the quietest route on the whole mountain, and the one with the very highest chance of reaching the summit, the Northern Circuit.
It really is a fascinating journey to break down.
Oh, absolutely. Because, when you look at the various paths weaving their way up the slopes of Kilimanjaro, it is remarkably easy to view them all as, well, mere variations on a theme.
Right. Pointing you towards the exact same destination.
Exactly. Most of the famous trails operate almost like busy main arteries, pulling climbers straight towards the peak with this relentless driving sense of urgency. But the Northern Circuit asks for a completely different philosophy, doesn't it?
It does. If those standard routes are the bustling direct thoroughfares, the Northern Circuit it's the sweeping, deliberate coastal bypass.
I like that analogy.
It demands significantly more from you in terms of time and commitment, obviously, but it offers a profoundly different rhythm from the very first step.
Well, let's talk about that first step, because the journey begins at the remote western edge of the mountain, right? At the Lundarasi Gate.
Yes, exactly. And before you even set foot on the trail, the atmosphere is distinctly subdued compared to the busy southern approaches. You step immediately into an ancient montane rainforest.
And what does that actually feel like? I mean, to leave the crowds behind and just step into the trees.
The air under the canopy is incredibly thick. It's rich with moisture and that deep, earthy smell of decomposing leaves. You are walking through dense stands of towering camphor wood and podocarpus trees, with these massive vines hanging heavily overhead.
So it's quite a sheltered environment.
Very much so. It's humid, highly sheltered, and your vision is entirely restricted by the greenery around you. You might hear the distant calls of colobus monkeys moving through the branches, but the overarching sensation is one of being sort of cocooned. Yeah, and you spend that first night at Iknitin or a big tree camp, enveloped entirely by the sounds of the forest.
But then things change quite dramatically, because after a day immersed in that almost claustrophobic jungle canopy, the landscape just fractures.
It really does.
You step out of the tree line on the second day, and the sky simply tears open above you. This is the transition onto the Shira Plateau, and the sheer scale of the change is staggering. You go from seeing perhaps 20 meters ahead of you to gazing across a vast, high-altitude moorland.
The environmental contrast is genuinely profound. The Shira Plateau is actually the remains of one of Kilimanjaro's original volcanic cones.
Really?
Yes, it collapsed inwards hundreds of thousands of years ago. So
Yeah.
when you break out of the forest, the oppressive humidity just vanishes instantly.
Right.
The air becomes noticeably crisper, thinner, and much, much drier. You find yourself walking through endless fields of low heather and these striking, alien-looking giant lobelias.
And presumably, because you're approaching from that remote west, there's a real lack of traffic.
Exactly. The volume of other climbing groups is remarkably low. You are absorbing this wide, sweeping expanse of volcanic rock and open sky in near total silence.
Which must be an incredible feeling.
What it is. This is often the moment you look up and see the massive, glaciated summit of Kibo looming over the landscape for the very first time. It is a moment of profound revelation. You suddenly grasp the sheer geographical volume of the mountain you're attempting to climb.
And as you traverse this wide plateau towards Moor Hut, which is a quiet camp tucked directly beneath the northern slopes, you arrive at the crucial geographical pivot.
Yes, the defining maneuver of the whole route.
Right, because on a map, instead of joining the converging trails that pivot upwards to assault the summit directly from the west or the south, you swing away. You begin this massive, looping circumnavigation around the rarely walked northern side of the mountain.
You literally turn your back on the conventional trajectories. Moving from War Hut towards Buffalo Camp and eventually to Rongai Third Cave, you step into an entirely different microclimate.
Because you're facing out towards the Kenyan border.
Right. Yes, straight out towards the Amboseli Plains. Because the massive bulk of Kilimanjaro blocks the moisture-heavy winds blowing from the Indian Ocean to the south, the northern slopes sit entirely in a rain shadow.
So it's completely dry.
Incredibly dry. The vegetation thins out into an alpine desert landscape. The trails are composed largely of volcanic dust and loose rock, bathed in intense, unfiltered sunlight during the day.
But freezing at night, I imagine.
Oh, freezing the absolute moment the sun dips below the horizon.
Now, there's a glaring paradox here that we need to address for the listener regarding the atmosphere on this side of the mountain. Kilimanjaro is a world-famous peak. It attracts tens of thousands of climbers every single year. So when we describe this northern sweep as quiet, are we speaking in relative terms? I mean, are we just seeing 3 trekking groups instead of 10? Or is this a genuine, profound sense of isolation?
No, it is absolute unbroken isolation, truly. You will frequently find that your group is entirely alone in the landscape for days at a time. The southern trails can sometimes feel like a bit of a communal march, but traversing these northern slopes, you are walking through an empty, silent wilderness.
That sounds beautiful.
It is. You have the colossal, silent presence of the summit hovering over your right shoulder, and to your left, an infinite view over the Kenyan plains stretching out towards the horizon.
And the night sky must be incredible.
Staggering. Because the air is so incredibly dry and free of moisture on this northern aspect, the clarity of the sky is unmatched. At night, entirely devoid of any light pollution, you aren't just looking at the stars. The atmosphere is so transparent you can clearly perceive the curvature of the Earth against the distant, dusty glow of the African plains.
Wow.
It is a deeply contemplative stretch of walking that climbers rushing up the southern slopes simply never have the privilege to experience.
But this sweeping, isolated path, it requires an 8 or 9 day itinerary, making it the longest route on the mountain.
Yes, it is a significant time investment.
Right. And if you are listening to this, looking at a map right now, plotting your own climb, a logical counterargument immediately presents itself. You are spending almost a week and a half sleeping on the freezing ground. You are burning thousands of calories every single day, hauling yourself across a massive geographical loop.
I know where you're going with this.
Well, shouldn't doing more total walking and taking the longest possible path utterly exhaust a climber before they even begin the final summit approach?
It's a fair question,
Yeah.
but you are measuring exhaustion purely in terms of muscular fatigue, which is how we naturally operate at sea level.
Right.
High-altitude physiology dictates an entirely different set of rules. The true adversary on Kilimanjaro is not the physical distance. It's not the steepness of the paths. It is cellular suffocation.
The lack of oxygen.
Exactly, the severe lack of atmospheric oxygen. The extra time spent walking is precisely why the Northern Circuit boasts the highest summit success rate of any route. By forcing you to take the long way around, the topography naturally enforces a perfect climb-high, sleep-low rhythm.
So the undulations of the northern topography are actually acting as a biological training ground.
That is perfectly put. As you traverse the ridges and valleys of the northern slopes, you are intentionally exposing your body to higher elevations during the midday walking hours. When you ascend into that thinner air, you are temporarily starving your tissues of oxygen.
Which sounds dangerous, but it's part of the process.
It is mild, controlled hypoxia, and it triggers a remarkable biological response. Your kidneys detect the drop in oxygen saturation and release a hormone called erythropoietin.
Erythropoietin.
Yes, and this hormone travels to your bone marrow and commands it to manufacture fresh red blood cells, which are the vehicles your body uses to transport oxygen molecules.
But the manufacturing process takes time, and more importantly, it requires a sufficient supply of oxygen to actually complete the cycle, doesn't it?
Which is why the descent to your evening camp is so critical. After triggering the hormone release at altitude, you drop down several hundred meters to sleep. You give your body the marginally thicker, more oxygen-rich air it needs to fuel that manufacturing process overnight. I see. By repeating this undulating pattern day after day on the long northern loop, you are actively changing your blood chemistry. You are increasing your capillary density and radically improving your body's ability to capture what little oxygen is available in the atmosphere.
So you are basically building a far more efficient internal engine.
Exactly. You do not arrive at the final summit approach depleted by the extra walking. You arrive physiologically transformed. You are far more capable and, crucially, much less burdened by the debilitating nausea and headaches of altitude sickness.
And the pace is slow anyway, isn't it?
Very slow. The pace of the trek is remarkably gentle, heavily relying on the concept of pole or walking slowly. There is absolutely no technical climbing required, allowing all of your energy to be channeled directly into this internal biological adaptation.
That makes perfect sense. So the culmination of this careful biological tuning begins on day 6. You transition away from the dry northern aspect and steadily climb towards the eastern summit approach, finally arriving at School Hut.
Yes, perched at roughly 4,700 meters.
Right, resting briefly in the freezing afternoon air before the summit push begins at midnight. Now, I look at this summit night Not as a grueling final exam, but rather as a graduation ceremony.
I love that perspective.
Because you have already put in the work. By the time you wake up at school hut in the pitch dark, your body has spent a full week perfectly tuning its engine for this exact altitude.
You have absolutely earned your physiological readiness. But we should be clear, summit night remains a formidable physical and mental challenge.
Oh, undoubtedly.
It is a steep, dark ascent. You are navigating endless switchbacks up the loose volcanic scree as the air grows progressively thinner. The temperature is well below freezing, and you are climbing purely by the narrow beam of your headlamp.
It's very psychological at that point.
Very. It's a profoundly isolating inward journey, mostly devoid of visual distractions. You fall into a hypnotic rhythm, placing one foot meticulously in front of the other. But because your blood chemistry has been so meticulously adapted by the Northern Loop, you have the stamina required to maintain that rhythm. You climb through the early hours, pushing past the crater rim until the sky finally begins to lighten.
Arriving at Uhuru Peak, 5,895 meters above sea level, just as the sun breaches the horizon, illuminating the ancient ice fields and casting the mountain's massive triangular shadow across the plains below.
It is an overwhelming moment of achievement.
I can only imagine.
You are standing on the absolute roof of Africa. But reaching the summit, however, is only the halfway point of the day's physical exertion.
Right, because what goes up must come down.
Once you have absorbed the view and taken the necessary photographs, the mountain demands an immediate and massive descent. You turn south and begin the long, punishing journey down towards Mweka Camp.
This sudden drop in elevation is non-negotiable, isn't it? You need to plunge your body back into the thicker air, regardless of how tired your legs might feel.
Absolutely. The physical relief of descending into oxygen-rich air is palpable, even as the steep descent places a heavy mechanical strain on your knees. With every 100 meters you drop, the atmospheric pressure increases, forcing more oxygen into your lungs.
So you start to feel human again.
Yes, the mental fog and the lethargy begin to evaporate. You transition rapidly from the barren, freezing summit zone back down through the alpine desert and into the moorland, arriving at Mweka Camp physically exhausted but deeply oxygenated.
And then the following morning involves a beautiful final descent through the lush southern rainforest down to Mweka Gate, where completion certificates are signed and the reality of the achievement finally sets in.
It's a phenomenal feeling.
But if you are actively weighing up your options, trying to decide if those extra days in a tent are genuinely worth the financial and temporal cost, you have to consider the reality of the environment.
You do.
Choosing this Northern Loop means committing to 9 straight days sleeping on the ground. There are no permanent structures, no solid walls to retreat behind when the temperature drops, and no quick exits to the modern world. Is that level of physical immersion truly the right choice for every climber?
The deciding factor really comes down to what you prize most deeply about the mountain experience.
Okay.
The Northern Circuit perfectly suits the thinking climber. It is for the individual who views summit success not as a gamble, but as a physiological equation, and wishes to load the odds entirely in their favor.
And who wants the quiet?
Exactly. It's for the climber who craves peace, who values untouched wilderness, and who actively wishes to avoid the famous, crowded bottlenecks of the southern routes. It is also an incredibly kind route for anyone harboring natural anxieties about how their body will cope with extreme altitude. The initial investment of time and resources is heavily repaid in physiological comfort and geographical majesty.
But the constraints of modern life do not always allow for a 9-day expedition. Sometimes the required time away from work simply cannot be negotiated, or the budget stretches too thin to accommodate the additional park fees and porter wages required for those extra days on the mountain.
That's a very real consideration. And if the Northern Circuit is out of reach, the Lemosho route remains the absolute best alternative.
Right, Lemosho.
Yes. Lemosho shares that same spectacular western starting point at Landarasi Gate. It offers much of the remote beauty of the Shira Plateau and maintains a very strong summit success rate.
But it's shorter.
Yes. Crucially, it condenses the acclimatization process into slightly fewer days, typically 7 or 8, making it kinder on both the schedule and the budget. You do sacrifice the complete unbroken solitude of the northern slopes, as Lemosho eventually merges with the busier southern trails for the final summit approach. But you retain a beautiful, highly successful journey.
The choice ultimately reflects the kind of narrative you wish to write for your climb. You can opt for a rapid ascent alongside hundreds of others, leaning heavily on pure physical endurance. Or you can choose a quiet, methodical circumnavigation of the roof of Africa, trading the familiar comforts of the modern world for an unbroken, profound connection with the wilderness.
That's a lovely way of putting it.
You know, it's fascinating. You choose this route to conquer a mountain, but perhaps the mountain is actually teaching you a much broader lesson. We spend so much of our modern lives rushing, taking the most direct, aggressive route to our goals. Yet here, the absolute best chance of success comes from deliberately taking the longest, slowest path possible. It does make you wonder where else in life we might benefit from taking the Northern Circuit approach.
That is a very profound point to leave everyone with.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, do subscribe so you never miss the latest from the Vertical Sky Journal. You will find a full written version of this episode over on our journal at vertical-sky.com. And we would love you to come and say hello on Instagram, where we are at Vertical Sky, TIZW. Until next time, pull, and keep dreaming up the mountain.